I'm drawing a unit circle on the board for you.
Oh.
Just the first quadrant. You don't have to draw it. You have one, and you'll all have it recommitted to memory before AP exam day because it's necessary. So let's just see if you remember how to work with inverse trig functions. What is inverse sine of 1/2? If we're talking about sine, is that your x coordinate or your y coordinate? So you're going to locate the y coordinate of 1/2 and then choose the angle that is in the correct domain restriction. So what is the angle? Pi over 6, correct. So inverse sine of 1/2 is pi over 6.
Are we going to
If it doesn't tell you which units to use radians. If it's a multiple choice question and it's in degrees, then of course you would want to do it in degrees. Okay? All right. So what if we write it this way? Arc cosine of 0. All that means is inverse cosine. So what do we use for inverse cosine at 0? Pi over 2. So your angle would be pi over 2. So arc cosine just means inverse cosine. Yeah, on the back of it probably. For this section, yes. Now once we start taking the derivatives, you'll probably need your own paper for that. Okay, so is this good? You remember if you're doing arctan, you have to figure out which one has the y value over the x value. Okay, so we're gonna roll on through with that and see what happens here. What about sine of inverse sine of 0.6?
If you raise your hand and you say Ms. Humberger,
That would be 0.6.
during the middle of the AP.
What happens? No, not during the middle of the AP exam. What happens to a function and the inverse of that function? They cancel out, and as long as this value is in your correct domain restriction, then it just cancels out and leaves you with this. Does 0.6 lie in the correct domain restriction? Yes, it does. So this just cancels out and leaves you with 0.6. What about inverse sine of 2/3 pi? Remember, the sine domain restrictions are quadrants 1 and 4, correct? And isn't 2/3 pi over here in the second quadrant?
Yeah.
So it's not going to cancel out and just leave you with 2/3 pi. But it is going to cancel out and leave you with an angle that has the same sine value as 2/3 pi. What angle in these two quadrants would match the same sine value as 2/3 pi? Pi over 3. So this one would just translate over to the correct quadrant, which would be pi over 3. How about if I ask you to find tangent of arc cosine of 2/3? Does 2/3 show up on that unit circle? No. So I'm not going to use the unit circle for this, but I could use a right triangle. Could you draw a right triangle that has an angle in it so that cosine of that angle would have been 2/3? You can draw a right triangle, pick an angle to be theta. Now label this triangle so that cosine of this angle is really 2/3. What does that mean? Cosine, what sides are those? Adjacent. So that means adjacent to this angle would need to be 2 and the hypotenuse would need to be 3. So remember, arc cosine is asking you for the angle. Isn't the angle that has cosine of 2/3 going to be theta? That's the way we drew it. So doesn't that now just mean it's asking you to find tangent of that same angle theta? But to find tangent, don't we need that third side? Okay, so what's that third side going to be?
1. 2 squared. 1.
Square root of 5 using the Pythagorean theorem, right? 3 squared, subtract 2 squared, and then take the square root, so we're good with that. Now you're just going to set up tangent of that angle, which would mean opposite over, yeah. square root of 5 over 2. So what if we try to find cosine of inverse sine of x? So is this gonna be unit circle or triangle? We'll have to draw a triangle, because the unit circle certainly doesn't have variables in there. So we'll draw a right triangle, label your angle theta. Now, sine of this angle should be x over what? X over 1. So wouldn't this be opposite? Hypotenuse. Let's use that Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side in terms of x.
1 minus x.
And then what goes around that?
Square
Square root of 1 minus x squared. And now could you find out what cosine of that angle would be? Yeah? Cosine of this angle would just be over 1, which you don't have to include. We'll do the next one in the next video, so we'll have 2 videos for today.
Cut.